Okay, here we are in week 2 of lockdown semester 2. Continuing with the topic is motivation theory. I'll just do a quick update of where we were before. So we came through the early part of the Industrial Revolution. Of course, most of these theories come from the development of Western economics and Western type of companies. You have these big factories. They're very mass production focused. The goal is to maintain quality control with large organizations. There's no labor rights, there's no real understanding of human resources as different from, any other resource that's not human, it's just another input into the machine that prints the money for the capitalist. So I introduced you guys to a guy named Taylor, and Frederick Taylor was, I would not say that he was sympathetic to the worker. He was still completely believing that there was a differentiation and a separation in class between those who are managers and those who are employees. But kind of by accident, he ended up with a kind of idea of what motivation would be in the future, because he was able to at least see that there were some things that could make workers different from one another. They weren't all the same. So before, you would have maybe too many workers, there are more workers than you needed. So he created this idea of efficiency in factory production. So that efficiency meant that you would almost do a Japanese-style Kaizen analysis of all the different parts of a job. So you take the job description and you look at the tasks within the job and then make decisions about the efficiency, or how many or how much time it should take to do the task each day. And then at that point, you could measure a day of output. And as a result of that, you could determine, based on how much demand or how much work needed to be done, the number of workers that were necessary for that job. So Taylor really started to adjust the idea of staffing needs, and he also did that by establishing key performance indicators. It wasn't called that. It was called scientific management. But it ended up that we still have this idea of key performance indicators. And so since we can measure performance, Taylor came up with an idea that we could reward performance. Makes sense, right? If you can measure something, then you can start to do something with those numbers. So he's going to reward employees. Everything is external at this time. It's still not feelings. There's no internal motivation. There's no belonging. There's none of that. Everything is just physical efficiency and just extrinsic rewards, money in particular. So the idea was that the better the performance, then the better the pay or salary of the worker. as I mentioned last time, there are a few issues with that, in the sense that assuming that people want to earn more money assumes they have something to spend it on. It assumes that that money is going to actually benefit the worker in a way that gives them a better life. As I also established before, classes were solid. There was no middle class. There was no place to go. There was no, I'm gonna leave and go to a better place or a better part of town. Your friends are here in this working class, factory, tenement, apartment complex. And the local pub is here and your local football team is here. That's your life. That's where it is. If you move to another place, you won't even be accepted. You'll always be in the class that you started with in terms of other people's eyes. There's no jumping class. So to motivate people to want to have money as an extrinsic reward meant that eventually they'd have to create a consumer culture and create something that people would want in order to measure or, to create some either utility, some usefulness, or some actual differentiation, competition kind of thing between people. That became cars eventually. That became fancy radios and hi-fi and 1,000 other little luxuries. So there was a big success in terms of consumer culture and the way that it would help to increase money as a motivator, but it didn't happen. It really didn't happen until after or, between the beginning of the 20th century. It was not really a motivating factor until then. Our book on page 187 is a chapter on employee motivation. It has a funny quote. The only way to get people to like working hard is to motivate them. Today, people must understand why they're working hard. What do they get for that? Every individual in an organization is motivated by something different. That's a famous basketball coach. He wrote that, I think. And it reflects a change from an external world of mechanical relationships and external rewards to a fundamental change that understood that the workers have an inner life. There's something else that motivates them besides money. So it's a change. It's quite a change. Quickly, Taylor, one more time. Emphasize efficiency, productivity, and rewards monetarily. Money. The idea was that jobs would be broken into pieces and parts where workers could be more efficient. The workers would kind of become part of the machine, doing repetitive work at more and more efficient levels. The greater the efficiency of a worker, the greater the financial reward. This worked well for traditional hierarchical structures. Only productivity and efficiency matter. Ideas and innovation from the employees don't really matter. The managers are the smart ones. That was Taylor wanted to make himself part of the smart club. And pieces of output are made, and that's how much we pay employees. Application for the modern era. Now we still see a little bit of this kind of Taylorism. In big factories. But with today's employees, motivation has changed a lot. This was a very autocratic, top-down kind of approach. Also, does money motivate forever? There are studies that show that money will motivate up to a certain point, and then after that, the value of each extra dollar is not really that much in terms of employee happiness. Because the workers are being worked harder and harder based on some calculation of maximum efficiency and production, employee turnover is still quite high. So it didn't really succeed in what you want, right? That's kind of, so let's contrast this to what we really want out of employees when we motivate them. So, business experts disagree about the precise meaning of motivation. Motivation is like a drive, it's an inner drive, or it's a I think it has an active and a passive element, right? Your motivation is depending on your will, and here is the will to work, but also motivation is the process of finding ways to interest people in the work that they're trying to do. So, motivation, some people say, comes from the enjoyment of the work itself. We'll come back to that. Some people find a pride in the work that they do. They would not want to be not working all day or doing nothing. They feel something good about their work. And it's not just money related, right? It's like, if you say that someone, they make the best, back in the day, they make the finest swords in England. Someone's making those ting, ting, ting swords. There's pride in that craft that person is doing. And that's more than money, right? A desire to achieve goals. Earn money is one, achieve a promotion, that's another one. But those are only limited, right, within what we're going to talk about today, Maslow. Does motivation matter in business? In short, people's behavior is determined by what motivates them. The performance of an employee is a product of both their ability and their motivation, that they want to do it. A talented employee who is demotivated will not perform. Whereas a motivated employee who doesn't have skills will also not be able to perform. You need both. Perhaps though, it's about expectation as well. What do you expect from your worker? Do you expect your worker, if you give them more freedom, that they're going to take advantage of that freedom to become more responsible in their work? Or are they going to take advantage of that freedom to be lazy and take time off? These are some of the questions that come up. in management. But these are the goals. These are the goals. A well-motivated workforce can provide the advantages: better productivity, and also better, I think, feedback to the company about what's working and what's not. So better communication as well. So better productivity, better communication. This leads to economies of scale, which means that the more you can produce, the cheaper it costs to make one, because of, we'll talk about that later too. Levels of absenteeism. Less staff miss work, so the quality of the service or production of the company is better because there's less people missing. More importantly, less staff turnover. So as we looked at maintenance last week, the goal of human resource management in many ways is to limit how much turnover you have, because there's a lot of costs involved with training staff, and you want to have a crack team, right? You look at the football teams that have players that change every year. They don't build a rhythm. They don't build a system and an efficiency. They have to keep relearning how to work together. And hopefully, if workers are motivated from the activities of the company, they have better relationships with the unions and the management, which should make things work a little bit, at least easier to solve problems. And also attract employees who are, everybody knows. If you're a teacher, you hear about which schools are good to work for, and you hear about which ones are not good to work for. So you know that employees actually discuss these things. So you can see in the book, there's a number of kinds of KPIs that can be used. Some of them are based, throughout the entire employment process, you're gonna have KPIs, right? How many people respond to an advertisement that you put out in the media searching for staff? How many training days per employee do you require before they're ready to work full time? How much money do you spend on development of an individual employee? So it goes on and on. There's lots of KPIs. Everything can be measured, really, one way or another. Except for a few things. They found that Taylor's work didn't really work for everyone. That, how do you measure, you could say that police are responsible for lowering crime, but so is the unemployment rate. So is the amount of alcoholism in a culture. So are the amount of fairness and equality in the incomes of the people of that society. So you can't say the police, if unemployment goes down, you don't say, the police reduce crime. You can't really figure it out. It's really hard to separate those factors. A doctor, how do you measure a doctor? Do you measure a doctor's success based on when they cure someone who's ill? Or do you measure a doctor's success about how many people they prevent from getting ill in the first place? So as a system, if your country has a national healthcare system, it's meant to be more preventative, right? A better goal for that system would be to have people who don't have long-term illnesses that don't get found out and treated earlier. If you have a system where you only go to the hospital when you get ill and it's all about how much money you have in your pocket in order to be able to be treated in a way that you need, then you're going to resist going to the doctor until it's too late. That's not the doctor's fault. So how do you set a KPI for a doctor in a situation where some patients have been, checked every year for their whole lives, whereas other people haven't been checked at all, and then after 15 years they find out that they have some medical problem. So you can't blame the doctors. So some jobs kind of resist that kind of motivation, and as the United States and other industrial countries started to develop a service industries, right? You have service workers in restaurants and every kind of service. It turns out that there's different kinds of motivation when the only KPI is not efficiency. There's other kinds of things that we have to think about. And at the same time, Sigmund Freud introduced an inner life to kind of a public first understanding that people are motivated internally by things that are not really money oriented, right? That we have motivations for the choices we make in our subconscious, and of course that leads to advertising. But it was an important breakthrough in terms of understanding that there are other things going on in the worker that could be used to motivate them. And that's when Maslow really comes in. I'm on page 188. The performance of employees in the workplace is of great importance to the management of the employees who are the human resources of the business. Workplace performance can be strongly linked to the employee's motivation to perform the job. And there are many theories which have been developed to explain this motivation. Four of these theories include Maslow, Hertzberg, and there are some other ones. You guys have seen Maslow for advertising and marketing, and how we can look at the motivation of a consumer and judge how to communicate to them about the benefits that they'll receive from the product. That could be the most basic level of safety and security. Or belonging, something where we motivate by the social benefits that people get from wearing certain clothes. People appreciate that. So we can see that in marketing, the esteem of owning a Mercedes-Benz, for example. And so all kinds of advertising uses Maslow in their psychological understanding of consumers. And so the same is true for the staff. The same is true for employees. Why can't I make it big? So we have all these things to offer, and the reason why it's called the hierarchy is that some needs are meant to be more fundamental than others. So I'm a big fan of Scarlett Johansson. I really like her voice too. And I've always been a fan of hers. I would like to meet her, of course. But who is she? She's the Black Widow, right? But Maslow's theory says that So, I mean, some people would want to meet other famous people because they would want to say to other people, hey, I met this famous person. That would be self-esteem. That would be a kind of need to be important. I don't think that's why I would want to meet Scarlett Johansson. I'd probably be into belonging, something in the level 3. But if, for example, I didn't have any food and I had, I just was, trapped somewhere where I couldn't eat for 5 days, and I didn't feel well, and I didn't feel, I was starving, I would rather eat a sandwich than I would like to talk to Scarlett Johansson or meet her. My priorities change. If I don't feel the physiological needs, I don't think about the other needs. This is Maslow. So we can imagine let's imagine a horrible situation like being in a war. So somewhere in a war zone. So you're in a war zone, there's people shooting at you, there's bombs in the sky, so obviously you need to attend to your physiological needs first. You gotta find something to eat. You gotta find water. You gotta find a safe place to be. So the physiological needs of just food and maybe even somewhere where you can sleep become most important in your survival. Once you find a place, then you try to secure it, right? Once you have found it, you're like, okay, we need to secure this place. So we have food and water. We have survival supplies, and now we've got to secure the building that we're trying to stay in. Trust the people around us. And then we start to feel like, okay, I'm surviving, I'm safe for the moment, now I can talk to the people around me, now I can, start to consider the social aspects of life again, right? And then, you can build this power of a group, of a social scene, and maybe you can organize yourselves. Maybe you become like a guerrilla army, and you're able to have some success at, within the, defending and attacking the enemy that you're in the war with. Then you start to get this kind of confidence and achievement and respect of the group for your courage, your ability to fight, and eventually you get to a point, where you may actually feel it's something that's bigger than you. This fight is bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than all of us. It's a fight for freedom, self-actualization. But you can't get there until you have some, until you got water to drink, and basics. Anyway, that's what Maslow believes. And then when we get to the workplace, that's when, I think I'll let Jim talk about it for a minute, and I'll highlight some things.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at one of the most... Hi there. In this business topic video, we're going to take a look at one of the most popular theories of motivation at work. It's the famous Maslow hierarchy of needs. Now, of course, Maslow is just one of several popular and important theorists of motivation at work that it's likely you'll need to be familiar with as part of your studies, including, of course, old Frederick Taylor, the scientific management approach, and Hertzberg, who took a very different view to Taylor as to how to motivate people at work. But for this, we'll just look at Maslow, and I think he's most famous for the hierarchy of needs. Maslow, like so many of the motivational theorists, was a psychologist, and he was intrinsically interested in what motivated people, What were the factors that determined the level of motivation? And in a seminal study published back in 1943, entitled A Theory of Human Motivation, Maslow stated that people have essentially 5 sets of needs which come in a particular order. And this approach to human needs has been very influential in determining how motivation at work is viewed. The essential argument in terms of the needs is that these levels are all those which employees find they need to have fulfilled at work. And you work up the hierarchy from the bottom. So it's only once the lowest level of need has been fully met before the next need becomes important to an employee or worker. And therefore, in terms of motivation at work, what a business needs to do is to try to find ways of offering incentives to employees in order for them to feel that each need has been met, and therefore they have an incentive to progress up the hierarchy of needs. Before we look at how this maps to what happens at work, let's just quickly look at the 5 core levels in Maslow's hierarchy. It starts right down at the bottom with the psychological needs, the needs of all of us for the basics, for food, for warmth, for shelter. Once those are met, we then, if you believe Maslow, we then look for safety. We look for that job security, the knowledge that when we get up in the morning, the job will be there for us to do. And when we get there, we'll be working in an environment that's safe, that's predictable. Once we've achieved that level of assurance about that need, we look for a higher level need, the social need. Not only do we go to work to feel safe and have our basic needs met, but also we want to be part of something. We want to feel that belonging to a team or to an organisation or a business. And we also want to feel wanted and appreciated. That's a key part of the social need. Once that need is met, we can move further up the hierarchy still and try to address the needs of esteem. Esteem is all about self-respect, it's about status. Have we reached a level at work where we feel as though our skills and abilities are recognised and we have some status at work? And once we've achieved the esteem need, although Maslow recognised that relatively few people eventually make it to the top of the hierarchy, we look for self-actualisation. This is going well beyond the need for being part of a team, feeling belonging and status. This is about intellectual fulfilment of needs, fulfilling our true potential, being stretched and challenged to achieve targets. Now, let's just quickly map that hierarchy of needs to some examples as to how you might map that in terms of motivational methods. Right down at the top, at the bottom of the hierarchy, but at the top of this table, clearly the physiological needs are all around the basics of acceptable pay, proper working conditions and safety. Clearly that's all about health and safety, job security. When it comes to meeting social needs, there's clearly a role to be played from allowing or encouraging workers to work together in teams, perhaps to mix between the different disciplines, to provide them with the facilities to enjoy their time together at work and to socialise. But it goes beyond that. It's also about making sure that everyone feels that they are being appraised and mentored and appropriately trained as part of their social needs.
So it fits in with maintenance pretty well. Obviously, the working pay and conditions are going to be noticed by workers. Companies are going to compete for either, for skilled staff to offer better pay and working conditions. But there's also that element of contracts and job security, right? Like if you're working every week and your schedule is undefined and you don't have a contract and you're not sure your employment could end at any time, you don't have that security. If they offer you a new contract for 3 years, you think, oh, great, they really are committing to me. Their commitment to me, and if it provides me with security. Obviously, when you're at a work site and there's potential hazards and dangers, that's part of safety as well. American employees are unlike other employees in the world. Most workers in industrial countries, or whatever you want to call them, including Australia, Europe, even Singapore, and some other countries outside of the West, they have healthcare as part of a government responsibility, like education. Because of this, workers always feel pretty safe because they are taking, whatever, because when you're a worker, your health is super critical to your ability to perform a job. So if workers as a general workforce are able to keep themselves healthy, then they're able to remain confident and move on to other levels of the hierarchy. In the United States, healthcare is connected to your job, not the government. So if you have insurance through your company, and this insurance also covers your children and your family, then of course having a job provides you with that security, but also not having a job means that you are insecure with your health care. And so if you're a worker and you're thinking about changing jobs, or you're not really satisfied, or even not, stressed at your job, you may stay at your job just to maintain your health insurance. So if you know that you don't have to worry about your health, it's much easier for you to consider, like, okay, well, I want to go interview for other jobs. I don't want to do this job anymore, and to be free. Especially if your children's health care depends upon your job. Now you're thinking about more than just yourself. So I think that system is basically there to, more than motivate you, is to manipulate you to not want to change jobs. Social factors. Fairly self-explanatory. You have a supportive workplace, or your workplace is not really supportive and you're just an individual working independently who has to wonder if their performance is working or not. So you can have that motivation in school too, right? You can have a motivation where, you're thinking about the future security of your life, and that's why you're motivated in school. You could be motivated by some social, being there at school and being with people who are doing similar things as you. A lot of people are motivated at least to be in school by the social element. I don't know about a better performance. Maybe. If you think about it in terms of, like, did I get a higher grade than the other students? That's not really social or belonging. That's more like self-esteem. Like, I go to that school because I'm motivated because I want to compete and beat the other students. As a student, you may be motivated because you just like learning things, because everything that you hear about is cool and interesting, and you're just always fired up to hear about what's new and what's happening, and you just like learning. That self-actualization can be what motivates you in school as well. Curiosity and challenge, and so all these motivating factors apply to workforces, students, consumers, all that.
The whole esteem piece is covered by the classic elements of the organisational hierarchy in terms of job design, job title, who has decision making within that job role, where decision is made within the hierarchy, but it goes beyond that as well in terms of the amount of trust that's placed in someone at work, and also whether their achievements are recognised, and to what extent achievement is linked with financial reward. But finally, the self-actualisation at the top of the hierarchy is all about enabling people to stretch themselves and completely fulfil their potential within the organisation. It's about encouraging them to seek internal promotion opportunities, to take on greater responsibilities at work. Job enrichment is a great example of that, adding to, extending the challenges and the elements of the work, often making it more complex. So you can see there's a whole bunch of different ways in which work can be motivating, or employers can make work more motivating, that link quite nicely to the hierarchy of needs. However, Maslow's hierarchy has been around a long time, and it's not without its criticisms, even though it remains hugely influential. And of course, the key criticism to make about it is that, of course, as individuals, we are all different, and therefore, we don't all have the same needs. Now, Maslow would argue that, therefore, we'll find ourselves at different places within the hierarchy when it comes to motivation at work. But it is true, of course, isn't it, that our perception of what matters at work varies, and it varies not only between us, but also over time. So people coming into work at the start of their careers are looking for job security and then promotion opportunities, but as you spend more time at work, different factors become more important. And it's also important to say that the vast majority of people rarely find themselves at the top of the organisational hierarchy. So you might argue that the self-actualisation element is actually the hardest to achieve. Well, Maslow's been around a long time, and of course, if you've been a fan of social media, you'll have spotted that an even more basic need has been identified, which has been added to the hierarchy of needs. It's known as Wi-Fi or 4G. Actually, I've also recently seen maybe a seventh level, which is battery power on a smartphone. Maybe you agree or disagree with that, but it's proof that the Maslow hierarchy of needs has been an incredibly popular and well-known model of motivation at work. So there we go, a brief introduction to one of the most famous theories of motivation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Thursday.
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write essays that inspire, messages that forge a brighter
So that means that managers have to change their thinking. It makes it more complicated for them. They're the ones who have to kind of develop the flexibility to understand each employee and how they're different, and how they, how maybe when you're offering something to someone, and it's very clear to you that, this should be something that motivates someone, it doesn't work. It's a failed motivator. So why is that? It's because some staff don't really care about more money in this case. They're worried about they can get money in a different company, or it's not worth it to them because the workplace is too competitive or unfriendly. So there's other things going on that that need to be analyzed by staff. So I think that's helpful. That should be helpful in terms of your goal. Your goal, again, is always to maintain staff. What happened here? I'm sorry, real quickly. Your goal is to maintain staff, and if you're not understanding what motivates your staff, it's very difficult to do. And I'm opening up a classroom now. Come on, Google me, man. This crazy Google Meet stuff is making me crazy. Okay, so in our book, I mean, there's a lot to Maslow. You have to imagine that it was a pretty radical change to go from, okay, you know, the only thing that matters about an employee is their external performance and their external rewards. So then, you know, trying to understand staff and to figure out what they are motivated by. The old managers, you know, they're like dinosaurs if they think like Taylor. The new managers are the ones who are coming up with innovative reward systems. They're having team building weekends for the staff. I think you see that in a lot of Vietnamese businesses. They have the manager or the owner, whoever, will take the staff out to some restaurant and have some kind of social event to try to build some kind of belonging feeling. So there's a lot of different, and then rewards go for promotions and all those other things. So modern management of human resources is far more complicated than it used to be. Knowing what works can be the difference between being able to keep quality staff and losing good staff. So that's all for today. Next class, I'm gonna give some more examples of Maslow and then develop Maslow into the next part and the next theory, which has to do with a guy named Hertzberg. The book is okay, but it's far too short about these topics. We'll be on page 188 and page 189, and we'll have some Q&A next at the end of this class as well. Have a good day.